Emily Parker, a bright 22-year-old university student, thought she was heading out for a normal night with friends. James Mack McAllister, Liam O'Connor and Callum Hayes had other plans. Plans that would turn Liverpool's nightlife into a scene of fear captured forever on CCTV. What happened that night would shock a city and expose a gang operating in plain sight, preying on unsuspecting victims in the shadows. Liverpool's city centre was alive with its usual weekend chaos. Bright neon lights bouncing off wet pavements, the laughter of crowds spilling from bars, and the thump of music from clubs mixing with the distant hum of traffic. On one particular Friday night, the city felt electric, as though something was stirring beneath the surface that nobody could see. People moved through the streets in groups, some chatting, some rushing to catch the next train or bus, while others wandered aimlessly, absorbed in the night. Among them was a 22-year-old university student, fresh from a week of lectures, looking forward to unwinding. She had dressed simply yet elegantly for the night, carrying little more than her phone and a small handbag. She was laughing with her friends, their energy high, unaware that the night was about to take a sinister turn. The nightclub she entered was packed, a pulsating hub of music, lights and bodies. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of perfume, alcohol, and anticipation. The DJ spun tracks that kept the dance floor moving, while security staff navigated the crowd with careful eyes, checking IDs and keeping an informal watch. The student and her friends moved through the throng, claiming a small space near the center of the dance floor. On first impression, everything appeared normal. People drank, danced, and mingled, seemingly oblivious to any lurking danger. Yet, just beyond the flashing strobe lights, the beginnings of a plan were quietly unfolding. A group of young men had entered the same club only minutes earlier. CCTV footage later revealed their movements in chilling detail. They walked in with casual confidence, scanning the room as if searching for a particular type of person. Their behavior was careful, controlled, almost rehearsed. None of the crowd could have predicted the intentions behind the glances and subtle gestures exchanged among the men. On camera, they appeared to split into positions strategically, some near the entrance, some moving with the crowd, and others lingering near the corners where the camera's angles were less obvious. To any onlooker, it might have seemed like a normal group of friends out for a night of fun, but the footage told a different story. A story of quiet observation and calculated patience. As the night wore on, the young student's attention was drawn to the music and the movement around her. She laughed and swayed with her friends, unaware that every step she took was being monitored by the group. Moments of distraction, a quick trip to the restroom, a glance at her phone, a pause to talk to a friend, were captured by the club's CCTV in stark, revealing detail. Each moment of separation, each lapse in attention, would later be examined frame by frame, showing how quickly a normal night could turn into a dangerous situation. The contrast between the vibrant energy of the nightclub and the hidden intentions of the gang created a chilling tension. What seemed like a typical night out on Liverpool's streets was quietly turning into a nightmare. The cameras, while often ignored by patrons, were recording more than just dancing and laughter. They were capturing the first moves of a sinister plan that would later shock the city and change lives forever. The group that had entered the club did not act like ordinary troublemakers. Their movements were precise, almost professional, as though they had rehearsed this before. CCTV footage later revealed a pattern that investigators would describe as unusually methodical for young gang members. One of them lingered near the entrance, subtly observing the comings and goings of patrons and security alike. Another moved through the crowd, eyes constantly scanning, hands adjusting his jacket as if ready to react at a moment's notice. Two others positioned themselves near the bar and seating areas, blending seamlessly with the rest of the crowd while maintaining a constant line of sight to the center of the club. There was no loud arguing, no aggressive behavior at this point, but the calmness of their actions suggested a dangerous intent. Investigators later noted that the gang had been operating in Liverpool nightlife for months, targeting areas where security was distracted or understaffed. What made them particularly dangerous was their coordination. Unlike most random acts of violence, This group worked like a small unit, silently communicating through subtle gestures and eye contact. On the footage, a hand movement here, a glance there, indicated plans and adjustments to their positions. It was as though they were rehearsing the movements of the crowd and everyone within it, calculating who might be vulnerable and when. Their experience became apparent not just in their confidence but in their ability to remain unnoticed. They did not stand out like most gang members. They walked with the casual confidence of young men used to the city's nightlife, blending in with ease. While the club seemed chaotic from the outside, the gang's observation revealed a deeper awareness. They studied the patterns of people's movements, how groups formed and dispersed, and how moments of distraction could be exploited. Security staff, busy with ID checks and watching for loud fights, did not notice the subtle positioning of these men. On the CCTV, their eyes could be seen scanning the crowd repeatedly, a silent calculation of who would be easiest to approach. It was a methodical patience, a terrifying calmness that would later be described by investigators as clinical. They were not seeking random trouble, they were waiting for the exact right opportunity, and everything around them, the music, the crowd, the chaos, was merely a backdrop to their plan. Even within the crowded nightclub, they had divided responsibilities. One person acted as a lookout, constantly moving between rooms and hallways, reporting silently with gestures to the others. Another maintained a position near the exits, prepared to guide someone away if necessary. The two others drifted in the center of the club, watching closely for anyone isolated or distracted. Every move, captured on CCTV, would later become critical evidence in showing how organized and deliberate the gang had been. What appeared to be ordinary behavior was actually a rehearsal in real time, and the club itself, filled with unsuspecting people, became the stage for what would unfold. By the end of the night, the investigators would realize that this silent coordination was key to the gang's ability to operate undetected for months. Their method was not loud or reckless, it was quiet, calculated, and systematic. In the world of nightlife crime, this kind of organization was rare, and it would make capturing and understanding their actions both challenging and crucial to ensuring justice. The quiet professionalism of the gang, captured frame by frame on the club's CCTV, would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in unraveling the shocking events that followed. As the night grew deeper and the music pulsed louder, the young student remained immersed in the crowd, her attention divided between dancing and talking with friends. The nightclub seemed alive with energy, but to the gang, the chaos was an advantage. Their eyes tracked movements carefully, focusing on individuals who appeared slightly distracted, isolated, or unaware of the attention on them. On CCTV, one member could be seen subtly edging closer to the young woman as she moved away from her friends for a brief moment. It was the kind of separation that most people would consider harmless, checking a phone, taking a sip of drink, or adjusting a coat, but it was precisely the opening the gang had been waiting for. The cameras captured a sequence of coordinated actions that would later shock investigators. While one member approached the student, two others shifted positions in a calculated manner, creating a path that guided her toward a corner of the club, with weaker lighting and less camera coverage. Every step seemed deliberate. There was no hasty movement, no panic, only a quiet, almost mechanical precision. From the security perspective, nothing unusual appeared at first glance. The nightclub was filled with dozens of patrons, and the subtle manipulation of the crowd went unnoticed in real time. What made the situation even more alarming was the way the gang used their environment. Shadows, pillars, and blind spots became tools, while the noise and lights masked their movements. The CCTV footage revealed a chilling sequence, the student stepping slightly off the main path, the gang members closing in with careful timing, and the gradual funneling of her into an area that seemed isolated yet still part of the club. The footage did not capture the assault itself, but every frame told a story of planning and premeditation. Investigators later described this as a calculated exploitation of ordinary moments, turning what appeared to be normal social interactions into a trap. The psychological impact of this sequence was significant. The gang's ability to blend in, to wait patiently, and to move without drawing attention reflected a disturbing level of sophistication. They had identified vulnerabilities in human behavior, the brief distractions, the instinct to trust the environment, the assumption of safety in public spaces, and turned them into opportunities for crime. Every step of the student, recorded in precise detail on multiple cameras, became evidence of how carefully the gang orchestrated the event. By the time the young woman realized she was being guided away from her friends, the opportunity for resistance had already been minimized. CCTV frames show her movements as cautious but unaware, while the gang maneuvered around the crowd with minimal visibility. Their coordination was almost imperceptible in the heat of the night, yet it was meticulously clear in the recordings later reviewed by police. Investigators would spend hours analyzing every second, every glance and every subtle motion to understand how a crowded nightclub could become the setting for such a carefully executed crime. In the weeks that followed, experts reviewing the footage emphasized how the gang's quiet patience and attention to detail had allowed them to operate without detection for so long. It was not brute force that enabled them, but control over the environment, control over timing, and control over the movements of everyone around them. That night, the student became an unintended target in a sequence of events that had been silently unfolding in the shadows, and it would take the combined efforts of law enforcement, CCTV analysts, and digital forensics to begin unraveling the full extent of the gang's planning and reach. Within minutes, the nightclub's energy shifted from vibrant to tense. The young student, once surrounded by laughter and music, was no longer near her friends. Her brief separation had escalated into a disappearance that went unnoticed at first, lost among the crowd's movement and the flashing lights. It wasn't until the club began signaling last call that her absence became apparent. Her friends scanned the dance floor, calling her name, and their laughter faded into worry. Security staff, initially assuming she was simply elsewhere in the club, began checking bathrooms, seating areas, and hallways, but their search revealed nothing. It was then that someone suggested reviewing the CCTV footage, an action that would soon expose a chilling truth. On camera, the sequence of events was clear but alarming. The student was guided toward a less visible part of the club, an area shadowed by pillars and corners that cameras only partially covered. The footage showed the gang moving around her like predators, controlling her path with subtle, almost invisible movements. The careful positioning of each member created a funnel, directing her away from the crowded main floor. Every frame highlighted the premeditation behind their actions, the way they adjusted their positions in response to the crowd, how they anticipated security movement, and how they exploited blind spots in the club's layout. One of the most disturbing discoveries was the service door she was led toward. Normally locked and unused by patrons, it appeared to open without resistance. Investigators later speculated that someone may have facilitated access from inside the club, a possibility that raised questions about staff involvement or negligence. CCTV showed the door swinging open just as the gang approached, the student moving toward it with little hesitation, unaware of the danger. It was a moment captured in grainy black and white frames that would later become central to the investigation, a visual record of how carefully orchestrated the assault had been. Outside the immediate line of sight, the club continued as if nothing had happened. The music thumped on, bartenders served drinks, and patrons danced, completely oblivious to the unfolding danger. The contrast between normal nightlife activity and the calculated actions occurring in the shadows created a tense, almost surreal atmosphere. For investigators reviewing the footage later, the juxtaposition underscored the ease with which predators could exploit ordinary, everyday situations. A single moment of distraction, a brief separation from friends, had been enough to allow the gang to take control. As security intensified their search, the footage revealed the gang's efficiency. They moved in synchrony, guiding the student through narrow passages and around obstacles, minimizing the chance of being noticed. Their awareness of every camera angle, every line of sight, and every obstacle indicated prior planning. Even without violent movements, The footage conveyed a sense of menace. Investigators described the images as a silent warning of how quickly an ordinary night out could spiral into a life-threatening situation. By the time her friends realized she was gone, the gang had achieved their objective, and the student was effectively isolated. What began as a night of fun had transformed into a nightmare within minutes, captured meticulously by cameras that later became the only witnesses to the crime. The quiet coordination, the exploitation of shadows, and the use of overlooked exits would later help police reconstruct the event in painstaking detail, piece by piece, to understand the full scope of the gang's calculated actions. Once the gang and the young student were outside the immediate confines of the nightclub, the streets of Liverpool became part of their calculated plan. Street cameras, initially overlooked by investigators, later revealed the movement of the group in chilling clarity. The student was guided quickly through narrow alleys and poorly lit passageways, areas where pedestrian traffic was low and visibility limited. The gang moved with a sense of urgency, but not panic, as though they had executed this escape route before. Their awareness of the surroundings suggested intimate knowledge of the city streets and the club's layout, an experience that would later be crucial in understanding the full scope of their criminal operation. The CCTV footage showed the gang splitting into coordinated positions almost immediately. Two members took the lead, directing the student forward, while the others fell slightly behind or veered off to separate streets. Their movements were deliberate, creating multiple paths for escape and minimizing the risk of being followed. One camera captured a detail that investigators later considered a turning point. One gang member limping slightly, favoring a leg as he moved. It seemed minor at the time, but forensic analysis revealed that this small injury was instrumental in tracing his identity through later sightings. Every action, even the subtle adjustment of a jacket or glance over the shoulder, reflected a calculated effort to evade detection while maintaining control over the situation. The area behind the nightclub, usually overlooked by patrols and cameras, became a critical setting. The gang maneuvered through dumpsters, stairways, and service doors, taking advantage of shadows and obstacles to remain partially obscured from the few passers-by who might have noticed them. Even as they moved, the student's movements were guided with quiet insistence, her pace dictated by the gang's fierce coordination rather than her own choices. The footage gave investigators a unique perspective on how predators could manipulate victims through controlled, subtle pressure, making each step feel almost natural, despite the danger. In the chaos of the moment, the gang also displayed an awareness of public surveillance. They discarded items strategically, including discarded bags and accessories, to avoid leaving evidence behind or being identified later. Their faces were partially concealed, but occasional glimpses on the grainy cameras provided the first clues that would eventually lead to identification. One of the most striking elements captured was the seeming nonchalance with which they moved. To anyone observing casually, it could appear like a group of young men walking through the city streets at night. Yet for investigators, the footage revealed an organized pattern of predatory behavior, every movement designed to control, evade, and manipulate. By the time the student was out of sight of the main streets, the gang's escape had already begun. Their coordination, understanding of urban geography, and use of shadows turned the ordinary city into a controlled environment, where their actions went largely unchallenged. The sequence recorded on CCTV became vital evidence in reconstructing the night. It showed not just the assault itself, but the systematic way in which the gang executed every stage, from observation and positioning inside the club to the careful navigation of city streets outside. Each camera frame told a story of planning, precision, and a disturbing level of organization that investigators would spend weeks unraveling. For days after the incident, the police struggled to piece together the identities of the gang members. The CCTV footage from the club and surrounding streets provided a framework, but the images were grainy, the faces often obscured, and the movements designed to evade clear recognition. Investigators reviewed every frame repeatedly, analyzing angles, timing, and patterns, searching for even the smallest clue that could break the case. It was painstaking work, a combination of digital forensics, street knowledge, and instinct. At first, the trail seemed cold, and the gang's ability to blend into the city made them almost invisible. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A local shop owner, who had reviewed his own CCTV footage during the same time frame, noticed something peculiar. A young man appeared briefly in his store, purchasing a drink just minutes after the assault. The image was grainy, but the posture and a slight limp matched the movements observed in earlier footage outside the club. Digital enhancement techniques allowed analysts to isolate the man's features, and a faint tattoo on his wrist, partially visible in the video, provided a critical identifying marker. Suddenly, the gang was no longer a faceless entity. One member could now be linked to an actual name, a record, and a history of previous minor offenses, providing a foothold for investigators to start connecting the rest of the group. Using this initial identification, police began cross-referencing associates and known networks in the Liverpool nightlife scene. Phone records, social media connections, and prior criminal reports all contributed to building a profile of the gang's operations. It became evident that the group had a structured approach, assigning roles, scouting locations in advance, practicing patience. The limping member, who at first seemed a small, almost insignificant detail, turned out to be a linchpin in tracking the gang's movements over time. Every connection led to another piece of the puzzle, gradually revealing a network that had been active for months, if not longer, targeting vulnerable club-goers while avoiding detection. The process of identification also uncovered unexpected layers of complexity. The gang had developed methods to erase digital traces, using multiple phones and false identities, which made tracking them through modern surveillance difficult. Yet the investigators relied on traditional detective work alongside digital analysis. Interviews with bar staff, patrons, and local residents provided additional insight into the gang's behavior. Patterns began to emerge. The gang preferred crowded venues where isolation points could be exploited, used distraction tactics to divide attention, and relied on their familiarity with club layouts to control victims without raising suspicion. The evidence from CCTV, combined with these human accounts, began to paint a disturbing but increasingly clear picture of their operation. Within weeks, the police had identified the core members of the gang. Each member had a role, each had a history, and each had contributed to the night's events. What had initially appeared as a chaotic, opportunistic crime was revealed to be the product of careful planning and coordination. The breakthrough in identification transformed the investigation, allowing authorities to prepare for targeted arrests. From a cold trail and grainy footage, the combination of technology, keen observation, and a small stroke of luck had provided the key that unlocked the case. The city's streets, once a maze for the gang, now became a map of evidence that police could follow to bring justice to the victim and prevent future attacks. The moment the investigators began raiding properties linked to the gang, the scale of their operation became shockingly clear. At first glance, the homes and apartments seemed ordinary, tucked into quiet Liverpool streets with no outward signs of criminal activity. Yet inside, evidence of a hidden world emerged. Phones with deleted messages, IDs bearing false names, discarded clothing matching descriptions from the CCTV footage, and small notebooks filled with lists of locations, names, and schedules. It was a methodical record of a group operating with chilling precision, documenting their movements, victims, and strategies. Each item told a story, connecting pieces of evidence that had previously seemed isolated and random. Among the most disturbing discoveries were items directly linked to previous incidents. The gang had targeted multiple victims in the city's nightlife scene over the past year, exploiting the chaos of crowded clubs and bars to avoid detection. Many of these assaults had gone unreported, either because victims feared retaliation or believed authorities would not intervene. Investigators were struck by the meticulous nature of the records, showing a repeated pattern of scouting locations, isolating targets, and coordinating their actions. The gang was not only organized but had perfected their methods over time, using experience to become more efficient with each crime. The physical evidence, combined with CCTV footage, created an overwhelming record of systematic abuse and manipulation. In one apartment, authorities found discarded phones and bags that matched those seen in the club footage, confirming the gang's identities and actions. Digital forensics revealed messages detailing plans for future attacks and instructions for coordinating movements. It became evident that the gang had been operating with a sense of impunity, believing their careful tactics and knowledge of city layouts would keep them beyond the reach of law enforcement. The combination of planning, timing, and experience had allowed them to evade capture for months, turning the city's nightlife into a playground for their criminal ambitions. Investigators also uncovered subtle signs of external assistance or knowledge, hinting that some members of the nightlife staff may have been aware of the gang's methods. Discarded keys, access cards, and lists of club layouts suggested a deeper level of preparation than previously imagined. Each raid revealed a new layer of complexity: hidden compartments in furniture, encrypted devices, and detailed notes tracking victims' routines. The depth of the gang's premeditation forced authorities to reassess the full extent of their network and question how many others may have been affected but never came forward. As the pieces came together, the full magnitude of the gang's operations emerged. What had started as a single horrifying incident at the nightclub was now understood as part of a long-standing pattern of coordinated assaults and exploitation. Investigators realized that each item recovered, each digital footprint traced, and each connection established was critical to understanding the gang's methods and preventing further attacks. The evidence painted a picture not of random violence but of calculated cruelty, highlighting the terrifying effectiveness of their coordination. By the end of the raids, law enforcement had not only uncovered the gang's secrets but had also secured the proof necessary to bring them to justice, exposing a hidden network that had haunted Liverpool's nightlife far longer than anyone had realized. Within weeks of the raids, the arrests began, sending shockwaves through Liverpool. Police coordinated carefully, apprehending the gang members in multiple locations to prevent any chance of escape or retaliation. Each arrest was the culmination of months of painstaking investigation, analysis of CCTV footage, and forensic work that connected seemingly small details into a compelling chain of evidence. The members were taken into custody quietly, their previous confidence and control replaced by uncertainty and fear. The city had finally witnessed the fall of a group that had operated in the shadows for far too long, preying on the unsuspecting in its nightlife districts. Court proceedings followed swiftly. Prosecutors presented the evidence in meticulous detail, including CCTV footage from inside and outside the nightclub, images of discarded clothing and phones, and digital communications showing coordinated planning. Each piece of evidence reinforced the pattern of deliberate, premeditated action. For the victims, the trials were both traumatic and vindicating. Their experiences, once hidden or ignored, were now documented and validated. The court recognized the psychological and physical impact of the assaults, giving weight to testimony that had long gone unheard. The gang's carefully maintained facade of invisibility had been shattered, replaced by public accountability. The nightclub where the incident began faced scrutiny as well. Investigators examined security protocols, staff actions, and management practices to determine whether negligence had contributed to the crime. The findings prompted changes in safety measures, including stricter monitoring of entrances and exits, more comprehensive CCTV coverage, and enhanced staff training. The tragedy highlighted the importance of vigilance in public spaces and the responsibility of establishments to protect their patrons. Liverpool's nightlife would never be viewed the same way, with clubs forced to confront the reality that predators could exploit even the most routine aspects of a night out. The victim, though scarred by the experience, became a symbol of resilience. She worked closely with authorities, helping them understand the gang's tactics and providing insight into the moments that had allowed the assault to occur. Her courage in recounting events, cooperating with investigators, and later participating in awareness campaigns empowered other victims to come forward. The psychological recovery was a long process, but her role in bringing the gang to justice became a source of strength and a reminder of the power of perseverance and reporting. The sentences handed down were severe, reflecting the seriousness of the crimes and the impact on the community. Members faced long-term imprisonment, ensuring they could no longer threaten the public. Authorities hoped the outcome would serve as a deterrent for similar criminal activity, signaling that even the most calculated and seemingly invisible predators could be caught. For the citizens of Liverpool, justice brought a sense of relief. Though the memory of the incident lingered, the combination of technology, careful investigation and community cooperation had finally restored a measure of safety and confidence. The city slowly moved forward, but the story remained a cautionary tale. The events of that night and the gang's subsequent capture highlighted the dangers lurking in familiar spaces, the importance of vigilance, and the critical role of evidence in holding criminals accountable. Liverpool had faced a dark chapter in its nightlife, but through perseverance and determination, justice had been served, proving that even the most hidden crimes could be exposed and punished.